Esther. I'm personally delighted to be able to welcome Shannon Banks today. Shannon is a leadership coach and works with corporate organisations to develop their people by self-awareness and enriching skill sets that are aligned to the organisation as a whole. Prior to this, Shannon spent 2 decades working in the tech sector, with 17 of those years spent doing great work and winning awards in leadership and HR roles at Microsoft. And it was here that I first encountered Shannon when she was the HRD for talent management. I was producing an LSE back in 2014 called HR Vision, and I invited Shannon to be a keynote speaker. Shannon's presentation was one that always stuck with me. Her story was personal and it touched upon creating change, getting internal stakeholder buy-in, and as a female, how to overcome personal and professional challenges to achieve her goals. As a young woman on my own career path, I found it hugely inspiring listening to Shannon talk about courage and vulnerability and being willing to invest in something that might not work out. So I'm super grateful and excited to have Shannon join us all for this session, and I'm going to hand over now and let Shannon share more with you.
Thank you, Anissa, and thank you, Esther, for the welcome. It's really wonderful being with all of you here today. And I know this is a session targeted at women, but welcome if you're male as well. It's really important for us as women to have male allies, and I hope you also find this session valuable. I'm going to start by getting a little bit of input from you, and I want to use the cameras for that. So can I ask you to turn on your cameras to start, if you're at all able? Once we have the cameras on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out a series of statements. And what I'd love for you to do is to listen to each of these statements. And I want you to leave your camera on if the statement holds true for you. So if you agree with the statement for yourself, leave your camera on. But if it doesn't hold true for you, then I want you to turn your camera off and leave it off for the rest of the statements. Okay? On if you agree, off if you disagree or think it doesn't hold true for you, and then keep it off. All right. And I think Esther is going to put these into the chat as well, just if you need to see them as well as hear them. So the first statement is, I always speak my mind when I think it's important. So cameras on if it's true and off if it's not true. I always feel comfortable sharing my thoughts. I am always able to make my voice heard. On if it's true, off if it's not true. I always feel sure about my own skills and abilities. And finally, I never question my own competence. All right. So thank you. You can go ahead and turn your cameras back on, and I will share my screen. Just a second to do that. So probably what you noticed during that was that most of us have turned our cameras off at some point during those statements. They all touch on dimensions of courage and confidence. And the vast majority of us have times when we struggle to find our voice. And in fact, according to recent studies, 70 to 80% of us as women lack confidence at work. And this compares to about 60% of men. Anecdotally, as an executive coach, I can say that many of my total client base and the vast majority of the women that I work with bring this up at some point during our client relationship, our coaching relationship. And you might have noticed that I turned off my camera during that exercise as well. Because sometimes I don't feel confident and sometimes I don't feel courageous. And in fact, when Anissa reached out to me to do this talk, I thought, I don't really know if I can teach anyone anything about this. But then I really remembered that being brave doesn't mean that you're not afraid, and courage is carrying on despite your fears. So let's talk about how courage relates to confidence as a starting point. So here's a definition of confidence. It comes from a Latin word, fidere, which means to trust. And so having self-confidence is having trust in oneself. And what I've learned through my life and my career is that confidence is built through the experience of life, through facing and overcoming adversity and appreciating the value of your own perspective, and really taking courageous action and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So interestingly, the definition of courage varies depending on where you look. So there are some definitions like this one, which is from dictionary.com, which says that it's being without fear. So that's one way of interpreting courage. But then there are a number of other sources that define it differently. So here's Cambridge Dictionary's definition, which says that it's about controlling the fear. And Collins Dictionary says it's doing something even though we are afraid. And I can tell you, I really strongly prefer the latter interpretations of this word. So how do confidence and courage interrelate then? Confidence is believing in our ability to do something, and courage is about giving it a go despite our fear. And without courage, I believe that we never really develop true authentic confidence. So I was asked for this talk to share some personal stories and actions and advice based on lessons that I've learned in my life. So I'm going to focus on key moments in my life and my career where I had to be courageous, because it was getting through those experiences that helped me develop authentic confidence and helped me find my voice. And I wanted to start with this quote from psychologist Susan David, and I'll read it out, and I encourage you to really think about it as I read it. So it's: abandon the idea of being fearless. Instead, walk directly into your fears with your values as your guide toward what matters to you. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. This quote really resonated with me. My dad was a Presbyterian minister who passed away in 2018. And in the months before he died, he was actually teaching a class based on a book that's called We Make This Road by Walking. And the book was all about reminding us that we should walk the talk and lead by example. And I thought it was a perfect end to his ministry and his life, because it was how he lived his life, which was creating the road by walking it himself. So if you look at Susan David's path to courage and confidence, and know that we make the road by walking, I want to tell you just a couple of stories. So first of all, over the years, I've learned to walk directly into my fears. And in preparation for today, I was trying to think about why that was the case. And I can tell you it did not start out with courage at all. It started out by standing alone. I grew up in a really tiny Kansas town with 1,200 people. And it was one of these towns where if you did something wrong on a night out, on a Friday night out with friends, by the time you got home, your parents had already heard about it. And this was a picture of the main bar in town, truly. It's called Pete and Shorty's. And you might notice there is a sign above the door that says, all gravel roads lead here. And I don't even think that was supposed to be funny. So we moved to this town when I was 9 years old, and many of my classmates were first and second cousins with each other and had known each other since birth. And so my siblings and I showed up there and immediately felt like outsiders. There were a lot of reasons for that. We were Protestant and the town was predominantly Catholic. It was a farming community and my parents had master's degrees. I really loved school. I was a bit geeky. I wasn't very sporty. And on top of that, we didn't really have very much money. So while there were like a whole lot of things that I could have been teased about, what I remember most was that I was bullied for wearing the wrong brand of jeans. Now, I was desperate for these Gloria Vanderbilt ones. I don't know how many people on here are my age or how popular these were in England, but I was desperate for these jeans, and they were all the rage. But what I had instead were some off-brand hand-me-downs from my neighbor and my sisters. And in these early years, I really struggled to find my own way. I did not learn to walk directly into my fears at all. Instead, I learned to fly low and to keep my head down, and above all else, not stand out. So it was when I was 16 that I learned the joy and the benefits that come from courage. My family had hosted a whole number of foreign exchange students when I was growing up, and one of the families was in Finland. And when I was 16, they invited me to come and live with them. And probably out of a desperation for change, and really not particularly a statement of any confidence, I gathered my courage and I jumped at the opportunity. So remembering my background, I had never been abroad. I had only been on a plane once before, but I got my passport, which I did not yet have. I packed my bags and I flew halfway around the world. And I spent this year living with a Finnish family, going to a Finnish high school. And I spent the full 12 months there. I was completely outside my comfort zone for the vast majority of the year, and I absolutely loved every single minute of it. Now, we couldn't afford international phone calls, and this was many years before texting and email were possible. So I arrived in August that year, and I didn't actually speak to my parents until Christmas. So I went 4 months without talking to my family, and I was there with people I had never met. And I loved getting post. I absolutely loved the post. I like every day loved getting the post, but letters actually took 2 whole weeks to arrive. And so news from the US was like super old by the time I heard it. And I learned to ice skate on a pond behind the school with a whole bunch of like 3-year-olds skating circles around me. They were like really proficient skaters, and I was like falling over. And I learned to ice skate. I learned to cross-country ski. I learned to love the sauna. We picked wild mushrooms in the forest. It was a language and a culture completely different to the one that I had known. And what it taught me is that there's value in stepping outside your comfort zone and trying new things. And there's no shame in not knowing things. And once I saw the value in this, I've never really gone back, actually. And I've spent the vast majority of my life outside my comfort zone. So I've made a lot of unexpected and kind of unconventional moves during my life and my career. And some of them people have really questioned and wondered why I've been doing them. So for example, I lived for quite a time in Russia. I moved from the business into HR. I left corporate life and I started my own company. So I love being outside of my comfort zone so much that I've incorporated this into the business that I run today. So through all of these experiences, here are a few things that I've learned. So first of all, I learned the importance of the first step. So sometimes these opportunities seem really risky, but if you take the first step on the path toward them, then they can become surmountable. And so apply for the stretch job, send the query email, ask the question, do the thing that is the first step, because once you're on the path, it seems more manageable. I recently funded a scholarship with my business for university students who want to study abroad, but who've never traveled internationally. And my goal with that is to help them with that first step, because sometimes, frankly, all they need is a passport and a little bit of support getting along the road towards that trip. And if they take that first step, then the whole rest of the path seems more possible. So the second thing I learned was to step into the unknown and take opportunities that scare me. I always say if my job doesn't scare me a little bit, it's not really the right one. And as I said, one of the things I do in our company is offer people opportunities to get into their stretch zone, because that's where learning happens. Sometimes the risky opportunity is speaking up in a meeting. And it's really common for me to hear clients tell me they're struggling to make their voice heard. So for this, I've learned to try to speak up early. So there's actually research that says if you talk within the first 10 minutes of a meeting, then you're more likely to actively contribute to that meeting later. And so I've learned to find my voice at the start, even through small talk before the meeting actually begins. It helps me make myself comfortable, and then I can engage in a richer way. And finally, an important reason to get out of our comfort zone and to take these scary opportunities is that we're far more likely to regret things that we don't do. So if you're hesitating, really reflect on why that is and how you'll feel down the road if you don't give it a try. So I went back from my year in Finland and I went back to Kansas, and I felt a whole new level of self-confidence, and I had a different mindset around my diverse perspectives. I think I found myself seeing my old situation through a really different kind of lens. And I really enjoyed my last year of school, actually. I realized that we don't always have to fit in, and being different was okay. And I think actually once I had that realization, I fit in better, ironically. So that newfound confidence and courage to appreciate my differences helped me a lot when I entered the workforce, because I landed, as Anissa said, in technology. And probably not surprisingly to any of you in the room, I was often the only woman in the room. I was also one of only a few people who didn't come in with a computer science degree. So in my first tech company, I worked my way up, and for several years, I was managing a team of global technical leaders. So a very different background to me, mostly male. And I really needed courage to make my voice heard in a lot of these meetings. And sometimes it took other people supporting me to actually find my voice. So as an example of that, one day in my mid-20s, I was in a meeting with a customer, and I was planning to present our plans on behalf of our team. And I walked into this conference room, and the customer turned to me and he said, "I'll take a coffee, no sugar." Now, luckily, my boss's boss was there with me, and he turned to this client and said, "Shannon heads up our technical team and is here to present to us today. I'll get the drinks. Shannon, what can I get for you?" So I continued to need courage when I joined Microsoft. And this shows my age because this is a photo that was taken in 2002, which is more years ago than I wish to admit. If you look carefully, you might be able to see me standing here next to Bill Gates, and Steve Ballmer is in the red jumper over there. They were the leaders when I was at Microsoft. And this picture is from a somewhat selective event that they called Strategy Conference that I attended in 2002. And in this event, we were like put into small groups, and we were given a strategic challenge to work on with a VP sponsor. And then we were asked to present our thoughts back to Bill and Steve for feedback. Okay, so that was like how it worked. And our little group was given the topic of distributed development. And we were asked to think about whether Microsoft should open more global development centers, because at that point they were highly centralized in Seattle. So we went off and we did our research, and partially based on my past international experience, because remember I'd already lived abroad, I felt really strongly that distributed development was the way to go. And luckily I had others in my group that felt the same way. And we started down that path. And our VP sponsor warned us that Bill and Steve were going to hate it. Okay. So we courageously and maybe a bit stupidly decided to ignore our VP sponsor's advice and recommend something, even if Bill and Steve were expected to dislike this feedback. And during our work together, I'd been quite vocal, and I also was the only woman in the group. And so maybe, I don't know why, but somehow it was decided that I was supposed to present this controversial decision that we made. And I don't know if it was a compliment or if it was punishment, but I got the honor of presenting our group's work. And it was a 7-minute presentation timed in front of the group and Bill and Steve. And I practiced literally most of the night. It was in the morning following a day of work. And I remember sitting there with a stopwatch and one of the other people in the group and doing it over and over and over, trying to prep for this. I was really, really terrified. But I did face my fears and I did the pitch, and completely as predicted, Bill and Steve really hated it. But I was super proud of the presentation. And 5 years later, they were building a development center in India. So these experiences were not really all that easy, but what I learned from them is that I can use my differences as an advantage and know that I will bring a different perspective, and that can have a positive impact. So here were some insights that I had through all of this. So first of all, I've learned to speak up through questions. So sometimes when my perspective is really different from others, it's hard to come in with an opposing view. And I've learned that I can really influence people and help my voice be heard through the questions that I ask. Secondly, it's helpful to get people alongside you in advance. If you think that you're going to be standing alone with a really different viewpoint, if you have people alongside you, it can give you more courage to use your voice. And allyship actually works both ways, by the way. You need these allies to support you, and you have an equally important role to play in lifting other people up. So as successful women, I think one of our most important roles is being courageous in the support of other women and minorities. And then finally, I'd say, remember that you can learn from anyone. I've seen really exemplary courage from my teenage daughter when she has faced bias. And I was inspired by how our summer intern at my company this summer really gained confidence through the challenges that she had and how she talked through those despite being quite young. So consider reverse mentoring, where you proactively learn from someone more junior to you. Right. So my career at Microsoft lasted a whole lot longer than I expected. So I joined there when I was in my 20s, and I thought I'd be there for 3 or 4 years. But first of all, it was a really great environment. I was able to change roles a lot and learn, work with new teams, new products. I had new challenges, a bit scared all the time, which I said I liked. So while I was there, I moved from a technical role to user experience, to product planning, then to managing really large teams. Then I moved into HR and decided to focus strategically on people and systemically on people. So over time, I moved closer and closer to my true values. But one day I woke up and 17 years had passed, and I really knew I didn't want to be there my whole life. And at the 17-year point, I was in this job that it wasn't very well defined, and I really wasn't enjoying it very much day to day. But the thought of leaving after all that time was really scary. I mean, Microsoft felt like a big part of my identity. And that was the same year that our house flooded. So I live in Surrey, near the Thames River. And after a season of really heavy rain, we got this call from the Environment Agency who managed the Thames, and we got a warning saying that it was expected to flood. And so that evening, we packed up some bags and our cat and our daughter, who was 8 at the time, And we went to this hotel. And by later that night, our house was full of water. And what we thought would be a few weeks of disruption turned into months and months and months of instability. And it actually took us 18 months to rebuild the house and get back into that house. So later that year, while this was going on, while I was still living in rented accommodation with my family, Microsoft went through a big reorg, and that role that I mentioned that wasn't very well defined disappeared. So I always tell people that we need a push and a pull to make a change. And I had my pull because I knew I was interested in founding my own business, and I was wanting to focus more on experiential learning and positive impact. But I really loved Microsoft, and I was really scared to change. And my house was still torn apart, so it was not the ideal time to make a move. But frankly, this gave me the push that I needed. So instead of pursuing other internal opportunities that were at Microsoft, I took the courageous step and I decided to leave. And that was 8 years ago. I started my own company focusing on helping organizations to bring their purpose to life through their people. And we take people out of their comfort zone and we put them into really amazing experiences that help them develop courage and confidence, actually. We help them develop skills and perspectives and self-awareness that they need to have a positive impact. And for the first few years, we traveled with them all over the world. But that leads to one final story of adversity, which kicked off in March of 2020. So when COVID struck and the pandemic started, I was notified that I was part of the shielding group in the UK. I don't know how many of you know about the shielding group, but I was asked to stay at home and protect the NHS and stay out of the hospital. And I have had lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, my whole life, diagnosed when I was 12. And so I'm really heavily immunocompromised. And like others like me, there are like at least 500,000, possibly up to 1 million people like me in the UK. The vaccines don't offer protection because our medicines stop our bodies from creating the necessary antibodies. So they don't offer protection to us. So over 3 years later, I'm still shielding. So no restaurants, no dinner parties, no theater, no public transport, no shopping, and no travel. Now, for 18 months of this 3 years, I lived alone in a flat across the street from my husband and my daughter, so that my daughter, who's a teenager, could attend school. And I could actually see the top of our house from the window of the flat that I lived in. That's it, with that little oval window there. And this is the view that I had from that flat. And sometimes I could see my husband and daughter waving to me from those windows. And we could only see each other distanced and outside during that whole window. And all of these experiences remind me of this quote: "Behind every strong person is a story that gave them no other choice." And you can actually probably replace the word strong here with courageous. But I have leaned into vulnerability, and from these experiences, I have learned a few really valuable, important lessons. So first of all, as I said, we need a push and a pull to make courageous change. Secondly, crisis breeds innovation and courage. So throughout history, if you look at times of crisis, companies and people respond with creativity. So with the restrictions that I've had on my own movement, for example, I've pushed my company in ways that I really might not have done otherwise. And we're really good at delivering experiential work online now. And I'm much better in my ability to scale and collaborate in new ways with my team. Third, resilience actually takes practice. So I'm more resilient now because of our previous experience with flooding and the other experiences that I've had in my life. And I really believe that I can come through the other side. And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us. And finally, one thing that's really helped me in life is this concept of post-traumatic growth, which I don't know if you've heard of, but it's the idea that we grow through adversity and it can leave us stronger than we were before. So let's come back then to Susan David's quote. She tells us that we should walk directly into our fears with our values as our guide. And what I'd say is that my whole career has been what one of my university professors used to call a crooked path. It's a set of courageous choices that might not make sense when you look at them one at a time, but overall have taken me closer and closer to the real me. And as the founder of my company, I take everything I loved about all the past roles I've had and I combine them into one position. So I've learned through all of these life experiences that confidence and courage come more easily when you're making decisions in alignment with your values and your purpose. We only have one life, and every courageous step you take will help you build a road to authentic confidence. So walk towards what matters. Thank you. I am happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That was really inspiring, and thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing so many of your stories. Does anybody have any questions for Shannon? You want to either raise your hand or put them in the chat, then we can call you out. I'm scrolling through the participant list looking for hands.
Don't be shy. Feel free to come off mute. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Kelly, go for it.
Thanks very much for joining us today, Shannon. That was really useful. Given everything that you've just said, so do you believe that confidence is something that is an inherent part of someone's personality, or do you think it can be taught?
I personally really believe we develop it. So I think all of these courageous steps help us develop confidence. And I think that there's a difference between fake it till you make it and authentic confidence. I think there is a role for fake it till you make it at the start. I think sometimes you need that in order to step in with courage, but I don't think that's confidence. I think confidence comes by taking those courageous steps over and over. And then you can really be authentically courageous.
But do you think some people are just naturally more confident, or come across naturally more confident in their personality, the way they've been brought up, or their childhood or their schooling and things like that? Do you think that affects their confidence as well?
I think life story certainly has a role to play. Yes. I think that your family of origin and how you're raised and the experiences you have as a kid probably play a role, and personality could as well to some degree. I also think some people appear confident, but when you actually work with them and talk to them, they may or may not actually be confident. So yeah, I think it's a combination, but I'm in leadership development for a reason. I totally think people can develop themselves. And I think confidence and courage are both absolutely things you can develop.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, anyone else have a question? Katie, you're off mute, so I'm guessing you do.
Yeah, please. I definitely see, and I've personally been through a number of instances where either crisis or trauma have led to essentially being given no choice but to step up and make a change. But hopefully, in the absence of crisis or trauma, what advice would you give to people to be able to sort of step up and make the change, and hopefully without staring off the edge of a precipice that forces you off?
Well, thank you for asking that. I really believe in stretching yourself and stepping out of your comfort zone. And it doesn't have to be into like a panic zone or a point of crisis. I'd love it if everybody on this call had no crisis or adversity. even if I think we can learn from that. So I think you can create stretch opportunities for yourself. I think they are presented to us in life. And if they're not, you can go out and find them. So I think those moments are ways that you can develop the same set of skills.
We had a question from Tijal, which is in the chat box there. But after thanking you for an amazing session, they're asking, what's your top tips for demonstrating confidence? You mentioned speaking the first 10 minutes of a meeting. How can you move past imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say in my coaching relationships, for the men on the call, I think imposter syndrome is common with men too. I think societally, men hide that better or more than women potentially. But if you actually work with men and talk to them and they're honest with you, I think a lot of people generally face imposter syndrome. So I think I was trying to think about this because I like being practical. That speaking before the meeting starts, I think is really important. So if it's about finding your voice, like if I do something scary, I want to know people in the room and I want to know that people have my back. Generally, people are on your side. And so if you have a few people that you know are on your side, it makes it a lot easier to get over that imposter syndrome, speak up, have your voice heard, do the scary thing, whatever it is. So if you take all those examples I gave, the little 7-minute Microsoft presentation, I had those people that were in my room that I'd been practicing with. I knew they were on my side. I knew our VP sponsor was. And so that helped me to be courageous, even if I knew Bill and Steve weren't going to be. I mean, this is the same with everything I do, really. Like, I like joining calls early, getting to know people. I like, if I'm presenting in front of a large group, getting into the room early, meeting some people so that when I'm presenting, I have a friendly face out there. I know, oh, I can look at George. I remember I met him, then where he lives. Like, it's a personal connection that I have with him. So I think these are small, but actually meaningful in terms of being more confident.
I think that's such a great point, Shannon. Sorry, I was just going to say, we talk a lot about sponsorship and mentoring with our Women in Business group and finding a sponsor and a mentor. And, and that goes for everybody, it goes for all of the guys in the room as well, finding someone that can help you identify those stretch assignments, someone who you can ask to even come and sit in that really challenging meeting if you need that friendly face to sort of know you've got that backup in the room. I just think it's such a powerful thing. And, in my career, it's been huge to have really strong mentors that have supported me and my growth aspirations. So I think those 2 points are really critical. Any more questions for Shannon?
I have a question actually, Shannon. Thank you so much. That was really touching again, and I really enjoyed listening to more of your story. But just following on from the previous question about, finding your voice and tips, practical tips, you mentioned speaking in the first 10 minutes and getting to know people early. But what if you're being overtalked or outmatched in that meeting and you're really struggling to be lucid and articulate your point or get your points across? What any advice for that kind of situation?
Yeah, so I think the tip that I had around questions can come in there. So a couple things that I've tried. I do not know for sure that these will work for you, but I think they work for quite a few of the leaders that I work with. So I think formulating a question, especially if you're in opposition to what's being said and you don't feel that you're able to get that in, trying to formulate a question, write it down or write down what you want to say. And then you have to especially if it's a bunch of really dominant people, have to get in there and know that speaking the most isn't the most impactful. If you say something powerful, you might speak twice the whole meeting, but that can still have a really massive impact. So don't feel you have to be the most vocal person in the room, but make sure that what you say is well considered and you'll be incredibly impactful. And the writing down or the asking of questions is a good way of trying to do that.
Got it.
Great. Time for one more question if anybody's got one. No? Kathy?
Shannon,
do you
can
have
I?
one? Yes, go for it, Kathy.
Shannon, it's a very, very inspirational talk. So first of all, thank you very much. So you talked about reverse coaching. Some of the interesting things that you find from the younger generations. Can you share, like, what are the key, I guess, interesting traits that you find? What can we learn from the younger kind of generation of workforce?
Yeah, I mean, so, I'm in my early 50s now. And so I have a lot of younger people that I can look to. And I think I learn every day from my younger colleagues and from my daughter, frankly, and her friends and, all the younger people that I engage with. I think that we were talking actually as we were waiting for people to join about the differences for women and the courage that the younger generation has around speaking up around women's issues and bias and, all sorts of women's topics. And that wasn't necessarily true when I was younger. And I have huge admiration for it. And like watching how my daughter engages or some of my younger colleagues engage gives me more confidence. Because why didn't we speak up more? So I think that's one thing I would say you can learn. I also think there are just, with the world moving as quickly as it is, practical things around technology and ways of communicating and things that you can learn from different generations. So there's so much that's possible to learn. And I talk about this right now in generational terms, but you can also learn from people who are different from you in other ways. So I think finding people who mentor you, who are diverse to you, super powerful. Did I answer your question, Kathy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one observation is that I'm probably one of the older generation person in the company. It's never a thing that we were taught to be confident, but I do find, the newer generation of workforce seem to be even more confident or appear to be. So it's definitely interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if you got to know them, if they are wonderful, maybe you can ask them, what helps give you confidence. I mean, I always love learning from people who I think are good at things that I'm not so good at. And I just ask, and sometimes you get amazing insights from people. And you might hear that they don't always feel that confident and they're just really good at presenting that way. And maybe you can learn about what they do to present with confidence, even if they don't fully feel it themselves. Because there is a place for that sometimes.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
A few more questions just rolled into the chat, if you don't mind, Shannon, if you've got a few more minutes. Nathan wanted to ask about notes for male allies. As a male ally in the room, how can they best support our peers in being courageous?
Well, thank you. I mean, it's really inspiring seeing how many men did join this session. I think recognizing the differences that women face and have that and the positives of that, but also the challenges that we face as women, I think is really important as men. I think that sponsorship that we talked about is an important role that male allies can play. I think that when we used to do women's work back at Microsoft and try to support our female leaders, a lot of the research talked about the importance of sponsorship. And it didn't have to be a male, it could have been a female, but if you want to support some women in your organization as a man, one thing you can absolutely do is mentor some women, get to know them really well, really understand what their needs are and their challenges are and their aspirations are, and then try to help them get there, because clearly that can be massively helpful and impactful. I also think society teaches us to engage in different ways as different genders, and just to be aware of that. So this whole point that Anissa brought up around getting over-talked is a common one, not only for women, but certainly quite common for women. And so being aware of that, you can proactively try to help quieter people, whoever they are and whatever gender they are, have their voice heard in a meeting by inviting them in. So, Anissa, how do you feel about this? Or, Nathan, can you share your experience? So we can all do that. And that slows the conversation down and gives people who don't have a voice. And I think if we all practice that, it'd be a much nicer world.
Absolutely. One more question from Daisy. Wanted to understand a little bit more about overcoming setbacks. So, when things do go wrong, how do you find that confidence to, move forward anyway and overcome those challenges?
Ooh, it's hard. I think it feels in the moment like you might not, to be honest. I think sometimes it's reflection afterwards, which is sort of where that post-traumatic growth comes in. That whole concept really has helped me, because sometimes if you don't feel very resilient, you're actually developing yourself and you come out the other side a much stronger person. And I think having experienced that process a couple of times in my life really helps me overcome the setback, because then I know, ooh, I just need to get through this, and there will be positives that come from it. I didn't choose this, but I'm living this. Yeah. I also think I always say you can't always accept what's happening to you or control what's happening to you, but you can control how you respond to that. And so I think know that you won't always, in every single moment, present a confident, courageous self. We're human and we're not always confident and courageous, but try to figure out what you can take from the experience, present and respond the best you can. And then know that afterwards, if you reflect on it, you can probably grow.
I think that's great. And actually I had a comment from one of our senior leaders, male leaders who's on the call as well, Ian, who was talking a little bit about that as well, and saying that, your response to every frightening moment will either grow or diminish your confidence. Every time you step back, it diminishes, but every step you take, every step up, you're able to increase it. So every day matters, every experience can help you on that journey. And Ian, I hope I put that forward across properly for you. But yeah, some really great points there.
Beautifully.
Thank you, Ian. Great. I mean, I think we're pretty much running out of time, and we're going to probably call things to a close, but I'd like to say 2 thank yous as we finish. First of all, I actually want to say thank you to Anissa, because if it wasn't for Anissa, we wouldn't all be here with Shannon, because her relationship and the work she's done with her before, when we started talking about doing a forum, she said to me, I have the perfect person, and was courageous enough to reach out to Shannon and ask if she would very kindly join us today. So thank you to Anissa. And then, of course, we need to say a huge thank you to Shannon. It's been fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I probably was very mean to Shannon, because as we came onto this call to prep just before it started, I talked about how I've been watching the Brené Brown video about vulnerability and confidence and how inspired I was. And she sort of said to me, oh my goodness, no, that's not a good act to follow. But I think you've done a tremendous job of following that act. And I know certainly personally, I've walked away with some really insightful ideas and some really inspirational thoughts. So thank you so much for your time. We are exceedingly grateful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure. It's been really nice to be with you guys. Good luck to everyone.